So welcome everyone. I will continue to admit people as they show up in the waiting room, which is happening right now. I'm so excited to see so many people joining us for the third conversation, domestic violence in families. Today we're going to be talking about what happens when, so brain development and impact of family violence. So we have our same two amazing presenters. Saray Booten has been an advocate with the Family Violence Project for 3 years. She is currently working as the Child Protective Services liaison. In this role, she provides resources and support to survivors of domestic violence who have open Child Protective Services cases and helps them navigate the system by working alongside child protective caseworkers. And Michelle LeClaire, who has been an advocate with the Family Violence Project for 7 years. She is currently working as an educator, sharing what she learned from survivors about the complexities of domestic violence with community members and systems so they can better support those experiencing abuse at the hands of their partners. Welcome everyone. I will be monitoring the chat. We are also recording this, so please, just some housekeeping stuff. If you want to keep your video off, you can, and then just mute yourself so we're not getting a lot of background noise. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Saray.
Oh, it's actually me this time.
Oh, you, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah.
A little panic, Saray, sorry.
Thank you all so much for being here. This is wonderful. And I just want to say just a couple words about self-care. Some of the things that we talk about can be really hard on the heart, you know, especially when we talk about children. I feel like that is really hard. So know that resources are available. You know, you can reach out to our helpline and process more after this if you want, or reach out to us as well. And, you know, we're just continuing the conversation that we've had. You know, we talked about the foundations of like the complexities of abuse, and then, you know, the protective factors and safety planning, and how that's a big part of resilience. And we're going to talk more about resilience today, and things that people can do in the community like yourselves to support the resilience of children, because we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about the impacts of abusers' actions on children, and how witnessing abuse and, you know, being in a home where there is someone being abusive to their partner and or their children, you know, that has a huge impact on kids. And so keeping that person in the conversation as well, because I think we all often work with a survivor, and they aren't the person who created this. So remembering that it's the abusive person that has created this, and we're all working to, you know, pick up the pieces. So with that, I'm going to actually start with a video. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll do some processing afterwards.
Because of the way the brain works, you will always remember your very first roller coaster ride. Storing these new experiences is one of the brain's main jobs. In fact, your brain creates a mental blueprint of every new experience you have. A blueprint for any new touch is stored in one part of the brain. A blueprint for any new sound in a different part. And a blueprint for any new sight in still another part. But as powerful as that first roller coaster ride was, it can't compete with the lingering effects of your brain's earliest experiences. although you have no conscious memory of this part of your childhood. It is these very first experiences that literally become the building blocks for your whole life.
Unlike other organs, the brain is undeveloped at birth, and it is waiting for experiences to shape how it will develop. The amazing thing about the human brain is that the younger you are, the more sponge-like your brain is, which is the reason that children in 3 years can learn language, can learn to walk, can do all kinds of incredible things. But the very same biological sponginess that allows us to rapidly acquire language is also the same sponginess that makes young children more vulnerable to trauma than older children.
We have the opportunity to do police ride-alongs to a domestic violence situation, and so this was actually the first call I ever rode along. It was dinner time, and they were having spaghetti for dinner. It was dripping down the walls, the kitchen table was overturned, and we had 3 children in the household. Looking at this whole situation at the time, we said, no evidence of physical harm, the kids are fine. We learned differently, of course. The boy in the corner was classic behavior that we see with kids who have had chronic exposure to violence. He would just completely zone out, numb out as things started to get scary. The 6-year-old little girl on the chair blames herself for what's going on, but actually it was 4 years later that we really appreciated who had some of the most profound or severe harm coming out of this situation, and that was the 6-month-old baby who was now 4.5 and had seriously injured another child in preschool.
It's literally the opposite of the way most people think about this. Most people think young children, they don't really understand what's going on and they're resilient. But the fact is, if anybody's impacted more severely, it's the younger child.
The brain is put together like building blocks in a sense. Those first blocks that go together are the more primitive area, the survival brain.
The brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the inside out, so that the normal development of the top part of the brain depends upon healthy development of lower parts of the brain. The top part of the brain, where you do all of your thinking, is the part of the brain that is most changeable, easiest to modify. But unfortunately, if a child has developmental experiences of threat and exposure to domestic violence, the lower parts of the brain will be impacted and they're harder to change as they get older.
He was never physically abusive, but he was verbally abusive. There was lots and lots of screaming in front of the kids, berating, putting me down, and they pretty much heard it all.
Children exposed to domestic violence, children who witness their parents fighting, literally are experiencing a state of fear. And when this happens, the systems in your brain that are involved in thinking at the top part of your brain are literally shut down. It changes the brains of these children.
My son has seen and heard a lot of the violent outbursts. He was experiencing night terrors, and that was probably his way of dealing with it, because in his waking state, he didn't know how to articulate at 2.5 years old. So it was coming through, when he was asleep.
When kids are chronically stressed, one of the problems that we see is difficulty in attachment, in bonding, because they're so focused on survival. It's hard for them to reach out and connect with others.
My oldest boy went through a stage where he would bully his younger brother and seemingly laugh in glee. He was not remorseful or had no empathy that he could actually make someone cry. Many phone calls of him being disruptive in the classroom. He was a very bright kid, but that's when I knew that he was heading toward trouble.
A lot of these kids get labeled as being, bad, difficult, defiant. This is a very natural response to their circumstance. What the child is doing is a survival strategy for them, but it creates behaviors that are very difficult in the classroom. When they're in a crisis mode, they can't learn.
The tragic reality of children growing up in domestic violence is that they end up with mental health problems at a rate higher than children who are actually the direct victims of physical abuse.
My mother was a victim of domestic violence. My father was an alcoholic, a drug user, and it's just a cocktail for a bad living environment for children. My brother, he looked like he was crying on his way home. Me not knowing, I was just a careless little 6-year-old, seeing him climb up to my mom's medicine cabinet. I asked him what he was doing, and he boldly said, I'm killing myself. 8-year-olds don't talk like that. The first person I thought to call was my best friend's mom. By the time she came down to our apartment, he had a butcher knife in his hand. He's just cutting himself all over his body, and I was just bawling, just crying. There's nothing I could do to help. My brother was crying. He didn't want to be there. He was trying to run out. But I had already known that my home, wasn't my home. You know, it wasn't a place where I felt safe.
Childhood exposure to violence is about living in a threatening, scary environment that may escalate to physical violence, but it often doesn't have to. It's the chaos, the uncertainty, the fear of being in a home where things aren't okay. Very interesting talking about the roller coaster, because that's what we hear from adult survivors who are in violent households and also the children. The hard part for them, I think, is thinking about what is normal instead of this up and down life of being in a violent, threatening relationship.
Growing up in my home, there were 6 children. My mother and father, unfortunately, fought like cats and dogs. As a result of that, 2 of my brothers ended up being batterers. I have 2 sisters. Even today, they date men that batter them.
Exposure to violence is a lifetime legacy. We see that adults who have had negative childhood experiences often have coping behaviors that can be unhealthy. That certainly has huge effects on how one is going to parent.
It's really important for parents to understand that their internal state, whether it's calm, or whether it's alert engagement, or whether it's frustration and anger, whether it's sadness, depression, the baby absorbs these internal states.
I have been in the moment with that sense of helplessness and hopelessness and stress and anxiety and rage. It really damages the brains of small children to be under a constant level of stress and anxiety. Every day I hope that I haven't damaged my kid in any way.
They need to see from you as a parent how to deal with stressful situations in an appropriate manner. Being rational, not resorting to violence to deal with situations. Your children are going to learn how to deal with stress from you.
Luckily, my older son is verbal enough and is old enough now that we have conversations about how did it make you feel when that was going on? Was that scary for you? Yeah, and validating that.
The biggest thing that helps children exposed to violence is to be able to talk about their feelings, get those critical messages. It's not your fault.
Any conflict, I'm able now to stop before I add to it. I'm able to step away rather than trying to solve it at that moment in a state of heightened anger.
Just try not to go through it alone. If you have a strong support system, and know what avenues you have available to you, you know, in case you do need to get out. I was glad that we got help when we did.
One of the great things about brain science that we've learned is till the day you die, you have the ability to add new neurons in your brain, that the brain is more like skin in the sense that it can rewire and heal itself in the most important area, the cortex. We have the capacity to heal and do better. The biggest thing we can do for kids exposed to violence is how many healthy adults can they connect to.
I did a lot of my childhood in other people's homes, so I saw what positive relationships were about. I saw my friends were normal, you know, they didn't have the rage I had. Seeing parents that were together, that showed affection. Home dinners where everybody sat together. Those are the things that I realized were important. And instead of being envious, I incorporated it into my life. I wanted to be a part of that.
I know school is what made a difference for me. The teachers, the attention I got, letting me know that I could be somebody and I could do something.
In fact, my oldest son, his teachers, you know, all 6 of them were very instrumental in coming forward and providing him support when he needed. They allowed him to be homeschooled to give him time to heal.
The hardest part about being a parent now is trying to be different than how my parents raised me. Am I being a good father? What do I need to do to help you feel safe in your home?
That's the part, the brain development part, that I think we want him to know what normal is for us. And normal is having people who support you and who love you and who want to take care of you. And that we want that to be his normal life.
It's one of those pay me now or pay me later. And the truth is, children who are good at self-regulation, good at self-soothing, don't cry very much, and end up being, if you will, successful, are children who have had incredibly attentive early caregiving, which some people unfortunately think of as spoiling. It's exactly the opposite. Rather than spoiling the newborn, what you're doing is you are building in healthy self-regulation.
So those are the things that I want to create an environment for my baby where he gets the benefit of what I've learned from all these experts and also other parents. And believe me, they're experts too.
The most important thing that parents need to understand is that the brain of their child will become exactly what the child was exposed to. If you want your child to be kind, then you have to be kind to your child. If you want your child to be good at self-regulation and not lose their temper, you have to not lose your temper. And that's the beauty of the human brain. It is a mirror to the child's developmental experience.
Okay, so, and I'm sorry, I heard there were some technical difficulties during that video of like the screen being blocked out a little. So I'll put the link in the chat as well and add it to the email. The video is called First Impressions and you can find it on YouTube. We just think it's a really powerful video. So we're gonna go into chat groups now where you can sort of process with the other members in the group what your thoughts and reflections on the video are. And if you want to have one person to report out, that would be great. So Kristen's going to split us all up into groups.
We're all headed back. All right, awesome. So what I'd like to do is just hear some feedback from each of our groups, just maybe one or two things that you pointed out that either was impactful for you watching the video or that stood out to you with the video. In my group particularly, we were introduced to this resource by Melinda it's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and she's gonna post a link to it in the chat for everybody. She talked about how it's similar to this idea and how the author talks about how our bodies store stress and the learning experiences that come from those stressful events. So wanted to just bring that up. Thought that was a really cool resource that maybe as community providers we can look into, as she joked, in all of our spare time that we have these days. And then we also brought up too how public school systems could probably benefit from some training or more intensive training on things like this, because there is a sometimes disconnect between the behaviors that teachers are seeing in children and actually what's the cause of those behaviors. So those were two things that I wanted to bring up from our group. Who else would like to share from theirs?
I can go for our group. I think we were group 2 anyway, so that would kind of fit pattern for a second. So Deb, Rich, and I were both in the same group, along with 2 other folks who didn't get a chance to talk as much. One was in the middle of doing, I think, maybe some tech support or some kind of support with Walmart or something, and our other person couldn't get their mute and unmute to work. So Deb and I had a nice conversation. She mentioned actually that she's going to be using this video, the one that we just saw, as part of a parenting class tonight, I think she said, actually. So obviously the video is impactful to the point where it's a good resource for professionals And a great thing, I think, for, yeah, young parents to see, especially or any parents to see, to get a chance to understand like how important those developmental pieces really are in those first 3 years. And I know, and Deb brought up, there's a lot of those stereotypes, at least there were at one point, around like, if your kiddo is crying or what all, you just let them like cry it out or something. You're not picking them up, you're not babying them, quote unquote. Because I think a lot of the stereotype was the longer you do that, there's going to be an issue with like attachment. Now you're never going to see them. They're never going to leave. You can't get rid of them. You're totally attached now. But that's not, that's not it. It's just about them building that safety and security around like there's that person who, cares about them and they can kind of come back to. And I don't know, I think everybody kind of needs that a little bit, knowing what the safe and secure, who those people are in your lives, and just knowing that those people are available. Oh, and I should explain the mousetrap thing, but here's what's going to happen. You have to go to the Somerset Public Health Facebook page or Instagram page to see exactly what it's about, because we did a little team building thing a couple days ago, and my role in that, you will see how it's related to the mousetrap thing. So it's a plug for our social media at Somerset Public Health.
Thank you for explaining. I was curious. All right, awesome. Thank you. Those were some great points. Who'd like to go next?
I can go next. So our group, we talked a little bit about how it's a refreshing video. Like several of us have seen it before, and some of us have used it in trainings before, but not everybody in the group had seen it before. And it was said that it was refreshing to be having the conversation about how domestic violence impacts children, because that's not always a focus when there's a domestic violence training. So I think that was pretty important. And I brought up just that this particular video is part of a larger curriculum. I attended a Train the Trainer with some of the folks that are actually in the film, and it's part of a curriculum put out by Futures Without Violence called Happy Moms, Healthy Babies, or it could be the other way around, Healthy Moms, Happy Babies, which I do have the curriculum for that. So if anyone is interested in knowing more, I think I could probably hook you up with some of that material. But it's I think it's a really powerful tool. I think everybody agreed that in the in our group, just that it was a really powerful video to watch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. I think we have 2 more groups to report back. Who'd like to go next?
I can do a quick little report from our group too. We talked about pretty much the same things that other folks did about the generational piece, and about the shame that parents feel when they, I think what happens when people see this is, you may not realize how things happen. It was the medical advice of like, let the baby cry it out. And, parents are working so hard to try to do it all, that I encourage folks when they share this video to really emphasize this isn't about guilt or blame or shame, because we don't know what we don't know. That's such an important piece. Whenever you're showing this to people, being able to have a robust conversation afterwards, because we don't want people to feel worse. It's important information to have, but I always worry that parents are like, I've blown it. Like there's no coming back, but we know there's coming back from this. We know that there are a lot of resources, and we'll talk, during this training about ways that you can build resiliency in kids.
Yes, I thank you for pointing that out. I always feel like the video kind of ends with this like, okay, now what? And that resiliency piece absolutely is going to be the focus. So I'll move things along here in kind of breaking into our next part, because I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time at the end of the training or towards the end to talk about that resiliency piece. So in complement to the video that we just watched, what I want to do is kind of break down some developmental stages looking at the types of abuse that can affect children at those developmental stages, and then some of the behaviors or emotional impacts that we're looking at and potentially seeing. You know, people in this training are community providers. You're working with families. So it is good for you to know when you're working with families and connecting with children potentially, you know, if there's a certain behavior that you're seeing, could it mean something else is going on in the home? Is it a perfect science? No, absolutely not. We always need to take things with a grain of salt and, you know, look at the whole big picture. But it is important to kind of maybe be aware of some of these behaviors that could be indicating something more is going on in the home. So our first developmental stage is pregnancy. So baby is in utero at this point, and baby can be affected two ways while developing. So if mom is experiencing physical abuse, baby then can in turn be potentially hurt while in utero because of the physical violence. And then if mom is experiencing physical or any other type of violence as well that's causing these high levels of stress, these high levels of cortisol, that stress chemical to be released, baby is getting that, which can lead to that development of the brain and having these high levels of stress, having these high levels of cortisol, impacting how the brain is developed. So those are the two types that, because mom is being affected, it is also affecting baby. And I think that that's not something that a lot of people think about. And I think that's maybe one of the hardest conversations to have with people. I know I personally work with a lot of pregnant moms, and having this conversation is not a fun conversation. So if you are supporting a mom that's pregnant and potentially experiencing some abuse, I do think that this, while hard, is a good conversation to have and to bring to their attention that, you know, we really want to make sure that you are safe, because it's not just about you right now. It is about you and baby too. Our next stage is infants. So now baby is born, and we're still seeing, so if mom is experiencing physical violence, baby then in turn be hurt due to proximity to mom. We know that domestic violence and child abuse oftentimes overlap, but they're not like mutually exclusive. So just because mom is experiencing violence doesn't mean that that violence is necessarily targeted at kiddo as well. Oftentimes what's happening is mom is being targeted, and because a newborn baby is in proximity to mom often, either through feeding or nurturing or caregiving, that child could be hurt, that child could be dropped, that child could be hit with objects that are maybe being thrown, anything like that. So physical abuse might not be directed towards baby, but baby is still being impacted in that way. And then again, if mom is experiencing high levels of stress through either physical or other forms of violence, she is still releasing high levels of cortisol. And babies who are, again, either nursing or having that close proximity bonding with mom, they're going to pick up on that. So what we can see potentially as effects from this are baby being colicky, sick, like nervous, jumpy, not bonding, maybe even going into failure to thrive a little bit. We also see potential signs of neglect because mom is dealing with abuse and her time and energy cannot be fully focused on the caregiving of the child. So malnutrition, any forms of neglect, lack of hygiene, things like that. Flatheads often are a sign that baby's not being picked up or moved or enough. You know, they're sitting in that one position for too long and leading to the flattening of the head and the back. So if you are working with a family and you're seeing a baby that is having any signs like this, again, these could be signs of other things, other medical issues potentially, or it could be a sign that there's some abuse happening in the home, and mom's stress is potentially affecting baby in that way, and mom's dealing with the abuse is also affecting her ability to care for the baby. All right, next developmental stage is toddlers, defined as 2 to 5 years. So with this age range, we are now seeing abuse more directly targeted at kiddo, whereas in the infancy stage, kiddo was still kind of getting impacted residually because of proximity. Now children are mobile. Now children are developing those speech patterns, so they can potentially be more directly targeted. This is with physical abuse. Unfortunately, now we're also introducing potential sexual abuse and verbal and emotional abuse as well being targeted at the kiddo at this age. So how does this affect toddlers? Some really big signs are delays in speech, delays in potty training, problems with regulating a sleep schedule. Like in the video, one of the moms brought up that her, I think it was like 2-year-old, was having these night terrors, and that was a way for them to express the stress that they were feeling during the day. So having really a hard time getting your kiddo into a regular sleep schedule, anything like that, wetting the bed at night, again, problems with like the potty training, especially for older children, you know, like 3, 4, 5, you know, if maybe potty training had gone really successfully at first and now we're regressing, we're seeing wetting the bed again or wetting themselves at like, you know, daycare during the middle of the day, those can be signs that things are wrong as well. I recently went over some of this information with a group of women that I work with, and one of the women asked, well, why is that? And I thought that was a really good question. You're like, well, why are we seeing regression in potty training, maybe regression in sleep patterns, lack of speech development? And a lot of it comes down to the idea that it's a way for children to control something in their lives. You know, a child can control whether they go to the bathroom or whether they wet their pants. And oftentimes it can be a way for them to get the attention that they are seeking from either, you know, mom or dad or another adult figure. We know that children don't necessarily regulate the difference between positive attention and negative attention. So especially in a household where there's domestic violence happening, negative attention might be the only attention that they're used to. So when they're going to at this age, it'd probably be like a daycare, maybe early preschool. That is a way for them to get adult figures' attention. At this age too, we're also seeing children acting out behaviors that they're seeing at home. So again, in a daycare setting environment, or with maybe siblings being violent, you know, throwing things, hitting, kicking, biting, spitting, anything like that could potentially be a sign that they are acting out what they've seen at home if there is that physical abuse happening in the home. So I think this is what the video was talking about, this idea that these children are just labeled as high maintenance, or that these are problem behaviors due to maybe early undiagnosed like autism or ADHD or anything like that. But in reality, it could be more simple, I guess, to say lightly, that they're acting out what they're seeing at home. And this is how they see their parents treating each other, or they see how their parents are treating them. So all of this can lead to, again, a lack of engagement with peers, a lack of ability to develop those social connections. So again, in like a preschool or daycare setting, seeing children not making those peer relationships, not engaging with other children, feeling very withdrawn, anything like that as well can be a sign. Our next developmental stage is 6 to 12, or kind of that early adolescence. So again, we're seeing all of the same things. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional and verbal are all being directly targeted at kiddos at this age. I would say that the the impact, especially of the verbal and the emotional, is more noticeable at this age, mostly due to how they are able to show this. So at this age, we are seeing the introduction into potential mental health problems. So that withdrawn behavior can start to lead into other signs of early depression, anxiety disorders, anything like that. So mental health becomes pretty apparent at this age. We can also potentially catch signs of mental health problems due to early self-harm. So I think typically when we think of self-harm with adolescents and teenagers, you know, we think of like cutting or other ways that are physically hurting themselves, which is all very true. It can be a little bit more subtle than that too. Picking skin on their face or their hands, biting their nails, pulling hair, anything that is causing some sort of physical pain can also be a sign of self-harm as well, and also can be related to these anxiety disorders. So kind of very crossover there. We're seeing an early interest in alcohol and drugs, especially if mom or dad, if older siblings in the home or the parents in the home are using drugs and alcohol as coping skills themselves for dealing with the violence and the abuse. If there is easy access to it in the home, it's been normalized to children and now they have access to it. So this early interest in, you know, when dad's passed out because he drank too much again, you know, taking the rest of the beer bottle upstairs to their room and trying it out, or, you know, something like that, or stealing mom's cigarettes, anything related to that. We are still seeing potentially that regression in behavior of like wetting the bed, afraid of the dark, not wanting to be alone in their room, still seeing these signs of trying to control their surroundings in what maybe people would call like, oh, you're just a picky eater. Could be early signs too of potential eating disorders, again, related to potential maybe depression and anxiety. So the mental health piece here is really affecting a lot of these other behaviors potentially. But if kiddo has had a problem with food for the majority of their life, this is where that may actually start to form itself into an eating disorder of some type. Children at this age too are also starting to try to find their role in the family dynamic. So I typically like to think of this as there's kind of two extremes. Children fall on the spectrum, or not the spectrum isn't autism, but this kind of range, I guess. Every kiddo is different. But on one extreme side, we have children that take on this caregiver or protector role. And this can be caregiver to the non-abusive parent. So pardon my gendered language, but let's use mom, for example. So feeling like they have to protect mom, feeling like they have to take care of mom, helping her with household duties, and also helping her with maybe younger siblings. So older siblings at this point are trying to take on this parentified role, maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously, maybe the parents have asked them blatantly to take on this more, like, I need you to step up, I need you to watch your kid, you know, I need you to watch your siblings while I go to work, something like that. It can be intentional, it can be not intentional, but children are trying to find their role in the family. Oftentimes that can be this parentified role in caregiving for either mom or siblings. On the other end, where the other kind of extreme is that kiddos are taking part in the abuse. Again, this can either be because it's been normalized to them if they've been growing up in this type of environment. So being disrespectful towards mom or other siblings, using violence to get their way, harsh, you know, language, anything like that, they can take on these abusive tendencies and be abusive towards mom, towards younger siblings. We're also seeing kids at this age probably having some trouble in school, because again, they're acting out behaviors that they're seeing at home, and especially if they're taking on this kind of abusive role in their family, they're probably taking on this abusive role with their peers as well. So, you know, our typical kind of, you know, bullying situations. So this adolescence stage, then leading into the teenage years, really pretty much all of the same things that I just talked about. I would just say the difference is that it's more intensified. So now that early interest in drugs and alcohol is full-blown using drugs and alcohol as a coping skill. Now we're also seeing an early interest in sex, most likely unsafe sex. So they are, again, bringing in the things that they've learned their whole lives. So children who are normalized to violence are incorporating that violence into now their teenage relationships, those early explorations of love and, you know, their bodies. And when you are raised in an environment with violence, oftentimes a conversation around consent probably isn't happening as it should be, because if somebody is being violent towards you, you are not giving them consent to be violent towards you. So this can lead to, unfortunately, lack of understanding around consent when it comes to sex. So the children in these teenage years, they're using these coping skills to handle the violence in ways that they can. So the drugs, the alcohol, smoking, cigarettes, sex. At this point, we might see that the problems at school have intensified so much that they've either dropped out of school, maybe they've been expelled, early introduction into gang activity potentially, you know, this idea of wanting to belong to something. Again, not really being able to set those boundaries between positive attention and negative attention. So, and then again to, you know, mental illness, again, the depression, the anxiety, increases in self-harm, potential suicidal ideations at this point. So really just all of the things that we had just talked about, but it being more intensified at this point with teenagers. So those are our 5 different developmental stages. I do know that I just threw a ton of information at you. Are there any kind of follow-up questions to any of that? All right, awesome. I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Okay, and there's a few things in the chat. You know, we want to acknowledge this is a really hard thing to talk about. This is a lot of emotions, and we're a little over on time. We want to talk about resilience, and yes, I see something, how to reverse this. So whenever you know, we talk about resilience and, you know, other things that kids have gone through, we know that this isn't a life sentence. You know, we know that this doesn't have to be what their lives become. You know, we all have people in our lives who have helped us through things as kids, and so really having a conversation about resilience, you know, is really important. So we're going to start on this conversation, and I want to acknowledge we may go over. So if you have to leave, that's okay. We'll send the recording out so that you can continue watching it, because we don't want to leave folks on this note of, you know, feeling hopeless, because I think it can be really overwhelming to hear all of this stuff. It is overwhelming, you know, as advocates, we see things, but we know that there is hope. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be able to be here. So was there anything anyone wanted to say before we move on to resilience? Okay, if there's anything, we're here for questions afterwards too. So we're gonna go to this slide is from a training we do with MCEDV, the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence, and it's really about tipping that scale towards healing. So you'll see on the left-hand side, these are the things that really help with healing for children and for parents. You know, really building that strong bond with the non-offending parent is so important. And so thinking about ways in your work as a provider, how can you strengthen that bond? You know, at shelter, you know, we have the opportunity, if we have something for that child, we give it to the parent to give to that child. And kids, it's amazing how they know who's in charge. Even though as advocates, we try not to be in charge, we try to not have any power. Kids will come and ask us for permission before they do things. So we say, no, go ask your parent. You know, your parent is the one in charge here. And, you know, maybe if you're in the community and a kid asks you, oh, can I do this? You know, and if their parent's not there, what would that parent say? You know, really putting it back on that relationship of that person. You know, that non-offending parent is the one that's in charge, and they're the ones you can trust, and they're the ones that you know, can rely on. And, you know, building those bonds like we talked about last time with those other healthy adults in the community, whether it's a coach, a teacher, a guidance counselor, you know, an aunt, an uncle, you know, having people in their life that they can rely on, that are safe, and that give them that nurturing and that support. Being able to talk about what happened, you know, I think that's like the most important thing, because kids have all kinds of emotions about what has happened, and they need to be able to process those. So, you know, I feel like, you know, in that video, they talk about how kids who are affected by abuse but don't experience it firsthand, you know, the effects are much worse. And I think it's because we sweep it under the rug. We're like, let's not talk about this. But I think that is not serving people, because, you know, they have all these experiences and no one wants to talk about it. So being able to talk to kids at an age appropriate level about what they're going through and being able to validate their feelings. You know, they still love that parent who's being abusive. You know, kids love their parents no matter what. And so you know, they have feelings about that as well, like how to process that. And it's okay to still love your parent, even though they hurt your other parent, you know, being able to talk about that. And, you know, maybe they don't want to visit that parent, but they have to because of court reasons, you know, being able to process that and safety plan with them, and, you know, not pretend like it's not happening, because it's happening and it's front and center for that child. So being able to, you know, give them that support, give them that safe place to talk, validate their experiences. You know, they may be relieved that they don't have to see the parent, and then they feel bad about that. You know, there's so many feelings. At shelter, we had a poster with all kinds of different facial expressions, and kids, like, they would just look at that poster and, like, you know, it's amazing how smart they were about facial expression. So knowing that they're taking all that in too, as a provider, you know, if you're having a bad day, to know, like, I need to like be really present with this family, because kids, you know, they may think it's about them even when it's not. And so just being aware of that hypervigilance, being aware of like how we are with kids, and, you know, being fully present with them, and, you know, yeah, just being on board with them and providing that support, providing that attention, that nurturing, you know, having those routines, predictability, having that physical and emotional safety, you know, a place where they know that they are safe is so important. And so that's why, you know, helping that parent, you know, helping those parents is going to help that child in that way too. So providing those services that you do, you know, it's so important to do all of these things. So knowing that there is hope, knowing that they're not doomed to repeat this pattern, you know, being able to really encourage them and their accomplishments, and, you know, just giving them the space to talk about their feelings and all of that. And also recognizing, you know, on the right hand side, you know, there are all these things that tip away from healing, including, like, you know, if people have to leave, like say they have to move, that can be traumatic too, or go to a different school. So being able to acknowledge that those things are happening too, and even though it's to be safe and maybe a good thing, it still is having an impact too. So just being able to support the kids all around with all this. And we're going to talk a lot more about resilience and how to do this too in the next session as well. But I wanted to give you at least a little intro, and we do have a couple more minutes if people here want to share what they do to promote resiliency in children. Like, what are the things that you do to support kids in your work and in your days?
I think just making it known that you're there to listen to them is a huge piece. You know, they might not take you up on it right away, but if you keep trying, then when they're ready, then I think, you know, they'll come to you.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, even just, you know, letting it be known that you can talk about this, because that's the other thing too. I think people don't feel like they have permission to talk about this. It's a family issue. It's something behind closed doors. You know, I think people are scared to talk about it too, and what that's going to mean. And I see someone say, grandma, yeah, having those healthy relationships with family members is so important. You know, having those people that are there for support, that makes such a difference in the life of kids, to have those healthy people that can build them up. Yeah, and we're taught to not have emotions, and especially, I'll say it, boys are taught to not have emotions, and that's a really big problem, right? Because they have all of these feelings about what's gone on, and they may be told not to cry and be tough when, you know, it's okay to have emotions about these things. So really supporting kids of all genders in their, you know, in what's going on. And Kristen, do you want to talk a little bit more? Do you have anything else to add about resilience? I know in the
I don't.
2
I
minutes
will
we have
talk.
left.
I know. I'll talk in the next session more about it. I did share an article that the Maine Resilience Building Network wrote in the Portland Press Herald today about what communities can do to ensure that young people feel like they matter. Because, you know, we can talk about how resilient our families are, sort of our sort of next removed connections, and then how resilient are our communities? And so where can we find those people that provide connection and support to us?
Awesome. And I'll share just for people, you know, if anyone needs to or wants to reach out to our helpline, we have our 24-hour hotline that's there for anyone. You know, if you just want to process what's going on, if this brings up something later and you just have questions, you can call and speak with advocates. If you have someone you're worried about, you know, you can give them this number and have this conversation that you're really, you know, concerned for their safety. And we can talk about that more too, of like how to have those hard conversations. And we have emergency shelter in Kennebec and Somerset County. We have court advocates available to help people get protection from abuse orders. Soraya is our liaison to CPS. So if Child Protective is involved, she's able to support families going through that. We have individual advocacy, which we do over the phone right now due to COVID, but we're still available for that. Our support and education groups, we are going to have a support group starting up soon. That's going to be virtual. So that's exciting. We do have supportive housing and ongoing housing services. We have educators who go to school. Nancy's here, and she's been doing some online stuff to support kids in learning about healthy relationships and everything. And we have specialized training like this, as well as the violence intervention groups for men. You know, this is sort of the piece too, you know, people have to choose to make different choices in their relationships, and this class helps people look at that belief system. And they do talk a lot about childhood in them, you know, how that was, and you know, making different choices as parents. It's all about choices. And same with the Women's Battle Intervention Group. It's done through KBH, but we're there as well, having those same conversations. And just if you're throughout the state, this is the slide, and I'll attach this in the email so that people have the information if they're in different areas. And anyone can call us, of course, but just different areas have different resources. They're mostly the same, but there may be more specialized ones too. So it's good to know. And you also had a handout on how experiencing trauma affects people, and then also the resiliency things as well. So that is a great handout done by the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. And you know, we don't always need to recreate the wheel. They have a great list of things that folks can do with kids to help support their emotional healing and resilience. You know, being present with kids makes so much of a difference in building them up. You know, we all have a role in this, and I really am glad that you all are here today for this. Any questions or thoughts? I know we're a little over time. We wanted to be respectful, and it's so hard to cram so much into an hour. It's just not long enough. So we'll see you again next month, and we'll do more talking about resiliency and how to support kids and families, because supporting parents is supporting children also. So thank you all so much for joining us, and do some self-care. Have a good one. Have a good day.